Welcome to another episode of Media Talks TV. I'm your host, Tony J. And today is the first week of Black Music History Month. Now, with all the things that's going on right now with this month, we got multiple holidays happening in June. You got June 19th, Juneteenth. You got Pride Month, and you got Father's Day. But very rarely we ever talk about or celebrate Black Music History Month. And I think it's fundamentally important that in this episode, um, I really go into some highlights about Black musical history because this year is very significant, being that this is the 50th anniversary year for hip hop music. And it's amazing to think that hip hop has lasted over 50 years. Like I can't even really um imagine that this genre of music has outlasted other genres of music besides maybe rock and roll and R&B. Hip hop has consistently, since its inception, been the most popular form of American music next to jazz. Um, Before rap music ever took off, it was funk and R&B, well, soul music, R&B, and jazz as the predominantly forms of Black music in our country. But after 1979, it seems like there's just been a consistency that around the world, globally, that hip hop has become a global phenomenon. There are people in Germany, there are people in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, there are people in France and in London and in Ireland and in Tokyo, Japan, that listen and ingest hip hop music all around the world. And I thought it was fitting for me to really go into the particular eras that I grew up with. I want to be doing a couple of episodes on that. And while really working on other episodes that I have coming up. But what's so interesting is, for me, the first time I listened to hip hop was really when I was in the eighth grade. Um, I wasn't really particular fan of rap music, and I didn't really understand it until my friends started listening to it, and then we started listening. Then we started watching music videos on MTV, MTV2, BET. So, hip hop music had been kind of given to me, but it had always been around me since I was younger. I could remember the first time I heard Africa Bambaataa on my father's stereo set back in the day. Um, I was no younger than 5 years old, and I remember hearing Africa Bambaataa when I was five. My father had a JVC stereo, double cassette tapes. Back then, if you wanted to record something off the radio, you had to have that double cassette tape, because if one tape ran out, then the other tape could record the next reel while you while you took the other cassette tape out and put another cassette tape in, and then when that cassette tape stopped, then you could eject that one and then put another one in, so you were able to catch what was going on the radio. And that JVC was really a transition from the reel to reel. So my father had one of those stereo sets when he was younger, and I remember growing up, he had a whole bunch of cassette tapes. And one of the cassette tapes that I remember listening to was Africa Bambaata's and the Soul Sonic Force Planet Rock. That was my first time hearing hip hop music on the radio. And then there was LL Cool J's My Radio. I remember that being played consistently on my father's stereo set. So I had a lot of exposure. And then by the time I turned 8, which I'm gonna jump into later on, um I remember hearing Juvenile's 400 Degrees, which really got me into Southern hip hop. 400 Degrees was one of those albums, and I'm not going to go in depth in this episode about that, but in the next episode I'll jump into why 1998 was a real transitional. It was a real big resurgence for Cash Money Records and No Limit, and it was one of the greatest eras of our time. But 400 Degrees and MP The Last Don, Master P, those were two big records at that time that came out and really opened the door for Southern hip hop to really get the wide exposure that it did. But today I really wanted to talk about 2005. Um 2005 is not too long ago. I know that is about 18 years ago. And I know it's still a relatively young period. But for me personally, going into high school, it was my ninth grade year. And I noticed one of the things I noticed about 2005 is that hip hop music at that time was really at a crossroads. And people ask, why do I say hip hop music was at a crossroads? Um, at that time, you started to notice people being. It was kind of like what I could best describe 2005 as is, it was the most complicated year for music, because especially for hip hop music, because there wasn't a lot. The South, Atlanta had its dominance in their sound, and you know New York started to lose its grip on being the dominant voice in hip hop. And I've had debates over and over again about about that year. And one of the things my friends have said, oh yeah, 2005, yeah, yeah, Jay Z and Cameron and Dipset, they were running shit. But I always say, you know, Cameron and Dipset, Jay Z, Jay Z had his grip, had his album, but, and this is a big but, 2005 was really the year for the South. And I say that plainly, and I lay it on the line. And I know people are gonna. It's the most debatable year And I've seen people online make a lot of videos. Um, this other channel, Stunt Growth Music or Stunted Growth Music, did a video talking about one particular artist in 2005 and what happened. And I can say that that year I had some fundamental disagreements about that video. And if you want to go check it out, you check it out for yourself. But um what I went on to say is that I put under his comment box that 2005 was the most complex year for hip hop. And hip hop at that time, just like with other musical genres, it had to redefine itself. You had an older generation that was trying to really come back into the mix, and then you had a younger generation that was trying to redefine the sound, and a lot of the older guys did not like what Atlanta was doing. And New York continuously beefs with Atlanta, but anytime Atlanta had the most dominant sound. And at the time, everything evolved around Atlanta. After 2003, everybody was fucking with Atlanta artists. Artist wise, everybody had to be down with Atlanta. Jay-Z had to be down with Atlanta artists. A lot of New Yorkers, they had to do features with Atlanta artists or maybe New Orleans artists like Lil Wayne, um, and the Big Timers, Juvie, those guys. So, and also you had Memphis, and Memphis was really, really, fucking shit up, you know, not in a literal sense, but in a metaphorical sense, fucking shit up. They were really pumping out a lot of hits. 3 6 Mafia was really one of those big, huge artists to come out of Memphis. And actually, Juicy J and DJ Paul, they were really putting out the sound. And for a long time, I always assumed crunk music came from Atlanta, but it really came from Memphis. Memphis is the home of crunk music. Don't let nobody debate you on that. Hip hop, when it comes to you had Lil Jon and the East Side Boys, you had BME Click, Lil Scrappy, Trillville. You had those artists, and they were releasing records. Then you had Bone Crusher, with I Ain't Never Scared, that came out in '04, well, late '03, early '04. So when those artists started becoming bigger, and then Trillville released their hit song, Some Cut, and then the song by Young Bloods called We Don't Give a Damn. I don't think y'all remember that. If we don't give a damn, don't throw it up. That was one of the biggest songs. That was the song that really put Atlanta on everybody's radar. So when Young Bloods put out that song, it and then after that, everybody just BET, MTV, it's like they were playing that music video incessantly in 2004, early 2005. Then the song White Tea came out. song White Tee. Oh, I Think They Like Me, and Nuck If You Buck. If you remember that very vividly, that's high school. Nuck If You Buck. So when those songs came out by 2005, you know, late 2004, early 2005, the West Coast was trying to get back their claim with the game. East Coast had 50 Cent, in G Unit, trying to, gain their relevancy. And then Young Buck released his album, Shorty Wanna Ride. That came out early 2005. And then, of course, Lloyd Banks had his album, his debut album. And then, of course, Disco Inferno comes out that year, of course. So now New York is trying to push back against Atlanta with their sound. Then Purple Haze comes out. Purple Haze comes out. Cameron trying to throw his shit in there. Dipset trying to throw their shit in with Certified Gangsters. Then on top of that, you had 3 6 Mafia, Popping My Collar, which was a big hit. So then it came right back to the South, and then they did D4L. Then snap music started becoming a thing. And snap music became a thing in 05 with Laffy Taffy and Shorty Low. Then T.I. comes out with Rubber Band Man and You Don't Know Me. And then Jeezy comes out with Thug Motivation 101. And Gucci Mane comes out with what's that song? I forgot the Soul Survivor with Akon. When Soul Survivor came out, I was like, ah, shit. And then that's when we got introduced to Young Jeezy. Then Gucci Mane came out with So Icy. It was a fucking bonanza. And in the middle of all that noise, Common was dropping his album. Kanye West was producing stuff for Twista. Jamie Foxx had Gold Digger, and then it was like, man, I don't know where I want to be at. And I remember listening to a lot of these artists when I was in high school, and I didn't know which ones I was down with, which ones I didn't want to listen to. And then Lil Wayne had his shit come out again, with the Carter, and I was like, I was kind of caught in the mist of some real good music, solid music. And yeah, 2005 was a very exciting year because like the South was really coming with the heat. And it was like you got all these artists and they're broken into factions. You got your older artists like your Nas and your Noris and all those guys that came out, 98, 99, your post Rough Rider, post Rockefeller era stuff. Because the Rockefeller era lasted from 1998 to 2003, and then they just broke off into factions. And the thing about it was, what I've heard rumor was it was because of Dipset and it was because of Cameron, and they were signed on the Rockefeller Records. And that caused a lot of tension between Dame and Jay-Z. They wanted more control over the artists, and they just kind of split. They can't, you know, then he started doing Rock Nation, and he's still, Dame is over there with Mace and all these other guys, and they're trying to put their shit in. And then you got the older, like pre 1990s artists trying to, come back. Rev Run drops an album in 2005 on top of having a reality TV show. And I mean, I wasn't a real big fan of the album. I listened to the album. I had the album. And then you got your underground artists, and then you have, people like Little Brother. Um, the Minstrel Show came out that year. Um, that was a beautiful album. I listened to it, but I didn't think the mainstream really kind of caught on to Little Brother like that. So they kind of get sit in the back of the bus like the little special ed kids that they are. They're like the special ed kids of the rap industry. Like they have their own thing, but nobody's really embracing it the way that other people that they are all like thing about Little Brothers, they're all about pure lyricism. And then and people like Nas and all those are lyricists. Over here, you have the snap music over here. Uh, uh, and all that shit right there. So you have that sound going on, and then you have your lyricists over here, your Nas's, your Mob Deeps, your 50 Cents, all those were over here, and then that sound, they were over there, but nobody was really embracing them like they were embracing snap music. So when the snap music came out of Atlanta, it was like, okay, and then trap music came right under it with Jeezy and Gucci Mane. And then they started pumping out fucking mixtapes, and then Lil Wayne was pumping out mixtapes and all that shit. And then all of a sudden, it's like, okay, you can't keep up with it. So then you're pushed into this decision making as a listener and as a fan of hip hop, as okay, where do I sit on the medium? You got your traditional MCs, you got snap music, and you got those producers, the producers like Scott Storch and all these guys over here, and they're making money off of just putting out beats. Kanye West is making his money. Swishahouse just blew up with Sitting Sideways and Paul Wall and what you call it, Chameleonaire and Mike Jones. So Mike Jones in that year, I remember it very vividly as being, they called it the Houston takeover, because Houston was doing their thing. Houston was underground for a long time with Chopped and Screwed, and then all of a sudden, Houston started having more push with their local stuff, because when people like Paul Wall came out and um and Mike Jones, everybody embraced it, but it only lasted a little bit of time. They only pumped out 2 albums after that, and the fame and the fortune, they all moved on. And Chameleonaire had Riding Dirty, which was one of the biggest songs of that era. Um, that was a real big year because it was so many hit songs that was on the radio. You couldn't keep up with it. It was so much regionally that the sound, you get, it was kind of like this sound overload where, you had a few people over here that fuck with Lil Wayne, and you had people over here that fuck with them Franchise Boys and all those guys, and what's that other group, Nuck, if you buck, Crime Mob. those guys over there, they wanted that hardcore crunk shit. So crunk music was really blaring over there. And then you had 3 6 Mafia. I always listen to 3 6 Mafia. The Project Pat was my favorite rapper. Crunchy Black. It was not Crunchy Black. But Project Pat, because he had a cadence with. And then you had so many people out. Um, Lil Jon brought out I think the album Crunk Juice. And I remember how big Crunk Juice was when they did Lovers and Friends with Usher. That was a big that was a big album. And also with 2005, you started to see R&B music start to dwindle. You know, you know, nobody was really fucking with R&B after that. The last great genre I always say of R&B music was neo soul. Now I know people don't like to hear the word neo soul because it has a lot of negative connotations attached to that. But when people like Raheem Devon and Floetry were releasing their last albums, and Dwele was releasing his second album, people were starting to move more and more away from R&B and more into rap and crunk music and snap music. Then by the time 2006 comes in, people were saying, well, what's considered real hip hop and what's considered garbage? And then you had, 2006 was the infamous, Nas saying hip hop is dead. And it was a referendum put on hip hop music by Nas because they felt like there weren't no real lyricists anymore in the industry. I remember very vividly Nas put out, I think it's called The Streets Disciple. I think it was called. And quote me if I'm wrong. Yeah, the Streets R-E-E. Yeah, the Streets Disciple came out 2000 November 2004. So what's interesting is, it's it's like, they kind of you started to see New York kind of getting pushed in the back for Atlanta. Everybody was fucking with Atlanta. Everybody was fucking with New Orleans and Memphis and Houston. So it was like all the music that was coming out, New York didn't have a grip on anything anymore because Atlanta was running shit. And the thing that makes 2005 so very complicated is that the music itself had to evolve in order for people to stay relevant in the industry. And with the older artists, you started to notice that most of the time, the older artists who were trying to get back into the game, they had to fight with the reality that, okay, I'm not going to be around here much longer, and the music is changing, the game is changing. I don't think I'm going to put out another record. Same could be said for Outkast. After Speaker Box and Love Below, I didn't see them ever doing any solo joints. The last album that Outkast did was Idlewild. That was for their movie Idlewild, and I really didn't. I really didn't mess with it like that. You started to see Outkast kind of fade fade into non-existence. And while that was happening, the artists, the new artists that were coming out, like Young Jeezy and Gucci Man, they were really making they name. They were really planting their flag in the ground to say trap music is here. Atlanta is here. And we not going nowhere. So you either fuck with us or get ran over. And New York artists and West Coast artists had no choice. They had no choice but to work with Atlanta. That's why you started noticing when Ice Cube dropped Laugh Now, Cry Later, he had to put Atlanta artists on his shit. Snoop Dogg had to put Atlanta artists on his stuff in order to stay relevant. Jay-Z had to put Atlanta artists on his shit in order to stay relevant. And that's kind of like the crazy thing about 2005. Rap music, those who had control of the sound were the determining people of the music and the culture itself. And I always had a lot of admiration for the South. I always talk about the South being what they are because the South was the only people, they were the only people that the record companies were coming to them. The South didn't have to come to the record companies. The record companies were looking for them. That's why you had Master P doing what he was doing. That's why you had it, but without Luke Campbell, there would be no Master P because when Luther Campbell had to do make his own record company, Slip and Slide, to put Miami and Atlanta on the map, that opened the door for Rap a Lot, and that opened the door for people like Jay Prince and people like 3-6 Mafia, the Swisher House, Michael 5000 Watts, people like that. But you know, Luke Campbell, Luther Campbell had to kick open that door. And then when Cash Money was doing their thing and when No Limit was doing their thing, pumping out 25 records in one consecutive year, the record companies came to the South looking for them because they had an independent base and a regional base. People were noticing that their sound was the dominant sound, but they weren't looking for record companies in the East Coast and the West Coast. They did basically essentially grassroots. And that's why one of the primary reasons why Master P retains all the control over the music that he created. A lot of places, especially independent artists in Atlanta, they still retain ownership over their music. You know, but that's for another video. But the thing I wanted to do in closing about 2005 is that it was a very complicated year, and there were so many factions and so many sounds exploding consecutively together that it was for too much for people to keep up with. So then they had to pick a side. Are you down with traditional MCs, lyricists, or are you down with snap music? If you ain't down with snap music, then you gotta be down with trap music. And that's the weird thing. Media at that time, especially MTV, they pumped out a lot of videos. They put a lot of money behind the South because they know people were listening. People were listening to Lil Wayne. Lil Wayne had a large following at that time. That was the beginning. Actually, I would say also 2005 was the beginning of the Lil Wayne era with all the mixtapes and freestyles and all this other shit. It just it just started culminating into something different. There'll never be another time period like 2005 because it's like 2005 just literally came and went. Kanye West released um Common's album B, which is one of the most probably one of the last big albums that Kanye West made, was also one of the last albums of Commons before he starts going into this shit with Universal Soul Control. I didn't like that shit. I kind of stopped listening to Common after 2005 because he kind of veered off of his roots because he was trying to fight to stay relevant in the industry and the music that he was creating. And it's not to say that was a bad album. That was a very good. B was actually very good album. I got that album and I think I listened to it all throughout summer 2005. I think that was my all-time favorite album that I don't have to skip not one song because each song on that album had a meaning to it and it tied in with who Common was. And then Little Brothers The Minstrel Show, which was another album that I brought in 2005. Uh that album was very symbolic and it was very conscious. Now I was into rap, but I was mostly into stuff like Tribe Called Quest, Black Sheep, Public Enemy, um, and Common, of course, and people like this guy named Quasimodo, and also, for the nerds, MF Doom. Of course, MF Doom. I listen to MF Doom, Madvillain, um, what's the name? The other album he had back in the day. Um, it was another album. I keep forgetting. Let me look this up. Shit. Yeah. Yeah. Food that came out 2005, 2005. And everybody was into MF Doom. I was a big MF Doom fan myself. So There were people like me. I wasn't into the real hardcore gangster shit like that. I mean, I listened to the game documentary. I fucked with it. I listened to the massacre. I stopped listening to 50 Cent after the massacre. I just wasn't really into it. His stuff with G Unit, Beg for Mercy, and all those other albums, Get Rich or Die Trying. 50 Cent is the Future. Those albums, those were his best works. 50 Cent's best works. After Disco Inferno, I wasn't fucking with 50 like that anymore. That gangster shit only lasts for so long. And he stood on a high level with Get Rich or Die Trying. I think that's one of the last greatest albums of the early 2000s. But after Disco Inferno, I was like, man, I ain't want to buy Curtis. So it was Kanye West, it was Common, it was a lot of people during that time. And I would say those are the only people that I really truly listened to, you know, early 2005. Now, the next video, I'm really going to go in depth to talk about um 1998 because 1998 that that year I would say was the year of Big Pun. It was the really the No Limit era, but it was also so many clicks. It was it 1998 was very cliquish because you had No Limit, you had Cash Money, and then you also had you had Nori with Super Thug, and it was just a lot of 1998 was a lot of R&B music being pumped out as well. So I'm going to really talk about that in 1998 in relations hip hop music in relations to R&B music and what was happening because there was a real good balance of music in 1998. Now, if you remember that time, I think that was one of the best times for music because the music it was a lot of it was so many artists coming out during that time and you know Big Pun was the first artist to actually get a Grammy, and Lauryn Hill was the first rap artist to get 13 Grammys for the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. So 1998 was really, really big for hip hop. I don't think there's never going to be another time period like that ever again. And I'm going to really talk about that in the next video. So, let's have a discussion. Leave your comments if you want to down in the description box or down in my comment box. Um, you know, just let's just have a discussion. You find this entertaining, hit the like, subscribe. If you new here, you just catching this video, just hit the like, subscribe, and you know, got more videos like this coming up. We're gonna be talking about other things as well. So thanks for listening to Media Talks TV. I'm Tony J, and I'm out.